You think this is funny? Olivia Bennet whispered under her breath, her dark skin glowing under the warm light streaming through the ornate windows of the grand wedding hall, the polished marble floors reflecting intricate patterns of sunlight and crystal chandeliers, her eyes fixed on the ex-fiancé standing arrogantly in front of a crowd of laughing guests, his smug smile slicing through the tension, every whispered remark echoing painfully in her mind as she clutched the delicate folds of her elegant dress, the soft rustle blending with the muted murmurs of the audience around her, the camera lingering on her furrowed brow and subtle tremble of her hands, capturing the emotional weight of public humiliation, while the golden light highlighted the strength in her posture, the quiet resilience underlying her shock. In the background, servers moved gracefully. Champagne glasses glinting in the light, the ambience rich and opulent, yet all seemed secondary to the stifling pressure of the moment, Olivia's mind flicking rapidly between memories of betrayal, the sting of mockery, and her unwavering dignity, each heartbeat synchronized with the subtle rhythm of the piano playing softly in the corner, every detail meticulously framed to emphasize her vulnerability and latent strength. Across the hall, Alexander Drake entered, the tailored black suit. Pristine, pale skin catching the light in a cinematic contrast, his gaze scanning the room before locking onto Olivia with an intensity that drew her attention completely, the subtle smile at the corner of his lips hinting at both authority and unexpected kindness, his presence commanding yet unintrusively protective. The soft echo of his polished shoes on marble punctuating the air, creating a tension that held the entire hall in quiet anticipation, the focus shifting from humiliation to suspense. Olivia's breath hitched slightly as she processed the sudden shift, the ex-fiancé's laughter fading into background noise, the cinematic camera panning to capture the glimmer of surprise in her eyes, the slight lift of her chin, the careful alignment of her shoulders as she prepared to engage with this new, imposing figure, while Alexander's subtle nod and measured step forward communicated silent reassurance, each movement precise and deliberate, highlighting the contrast between the chaos of public shame and the composed presence of an unexpected ally. The golden light bounced off chandeliers, crystal reflections dancing across the floor, illuminating micro-expressions, the gentle sway of Olivia's dress, the meticulous fold of her hands, and the shifting gaze of Alexander, all framed to enhance the cinematic tension and emotional depth, emphasizing the slow build of anticipation, the quiet suspense, and the dawning realization of potential redemption, the subtle romantic undertone emerging as their eyes met, capturing the full spectrum of Olivia's vulnerability, resilience, and the initial spark of intrigue that would define the unfolding dark romance in the grand, sunlit wedding hall. The hall seemed to hold its breath as Olivia Bennet straightened her posture, her dark skin catching the soft sunlight streaming through the tall windows, the polished marble floors reflecting fragmented light across the elegant floral arrangements and golden chandeliers, her eyes sweeping over the crowd, noting whispers, subtle glances, and the occasional sneer of those who had witnessed her humiliation moments before, each detail heightening the tension, the camera capturing her inner resolve and composure, the gentle flex of her fingers as they rested on the folds of her dress conveying both nervous anticipation and determined strength. In the background, servers moved with quiet precision, the faint clinking of glasses and soft murmur of conversations providing a realistic ambient soundscape that contrasted with the sharp focus on Olivia. The soft swell of a string quartet playing in the corner enhancing the cinematic texture of the scene, every element framing her emotional state and the pressure of the social setting. Alexander Drake moved with calculated elegance through the crowd, the tailored black suit perfectly complementing his pale skin, his sharp features catching the sunlight in a way that emphasized both authority and subtle warmth, each step measured and precise, his eyes scanning until they met Olivia's, a flicker of understanding and protective intent crossing his expression, creating a shift in the energy of the room, the ambient murmurs fading as attention gravitated toward his presence. Olivia's breath caught slightly as she recognized the subtle change, the weight of the crowd's attention balanced between curiosity and suspense, cinematic focus on the slight lift of her chin and the deliberate alignment of her shoulders, micro-expressions revealing cautious hope intermingled with lingering apprehension, the reflective surfaces of the hall casting dynamic highlights that added depth and realism to her presence, the interplay of light and shadow emphasizing textures of fabric, hair, and skin in high fidelity. Alexander's subtle nod and poised stance communicated reassurance without intrusion, his gaze tracking the nuances of Olivia's responses, the camera capturing the silent dialogue conveyed through eyes and small gestures, the gentle tilt of his head, the nuanced shift of weight from one foot to another. Each movement heightening the narrative tension and reinforcing the emerging connection, while the hall itself, with its elegant decor and reflective surfaces, became a stage for the evolving emotional landscape. As the moment stretched, Olivia's thoughts flickered between past embarrassment and the growing awareness of an unexpected ally, cinematic framing capturing the swell of emotion in her eyes, the slight tremor of a hand subdued by her composed posture, the soft sway of her dress. Reflecting her poised elegance, every detail meticulously constructed to convey the full spectrum of anticipation, curiosity, and the first sparks of trust that would define the dark romance, immersive in both emotional resonance and visual clarity within the grand, sunlit wedding hall. Olivia Bennet felt a subtle shift in the air as Alexander Drake moved closer, his tailored black suit immaculate, pale skin highlighted by the warm sunlight streaming through the tall windows, each step deliberate and measured, creating a cinematic rhythm that contrasted with the nervous flutter of Olivia's fingers clutching the delicate folds of her dress, her dark skin glowing softly under the reflected light, micro-expressions revealing a mix of apprehension, curiosity, and emerging trust. The polished marble floor reflecting fragmented sunlight across the hall, amplifying the visual depth and cinematic tension, the murmurs of guests, the faint clinking of glasses, and the soft strains of the string quartet blended into a muted background, emphasizing the focus on the interaction between the two main characters. While subtle glances and gestures conveyed unspoken communication, Alexander's steady gaze meeting Olivia's with an intensity that suggested both protective awareness and restrained warmth. Each movement calculated to project calm authority and unspoken reassurance, the gentle tilt of his head and slight adjustment of his stance reinforcing the silent dialogue unfolding. Olivia's breath caught slightly as she noticed the measured precision of Alexander's approach, the slow, deliberate alignment of his steps with hers, cinematic framing capturing the subtle sway of her dress, the soft flick of her hair, and the poised lift of her chin, highlighting her inner strength and grace under social scrutiny. The tension between her lingering vulnerability and the growing sense of safety and acknowledgement forming a delicate emotional balance. The polished reflective surfaces of the hall amplifying textures of fabric, skin, and ambient light, as Alexander paused at a careful distance, the micro-expressions between them communicated a silent understanding, trust beginning to form through eye contact, subtle nods, and slight gestures of attention, the cinematic perspective emphasizing the interplay of proximity, body language, and reflective lighting that created visual depth and narrative immersion. The surrounding guests' attention, diffused but present, reinforcing the stakes of public observation while keeping focus on the evolving dynamic. The soft swell of music underscored the moment, each note resonating with the subtle pulse of anticipation. Olivia's mind flickering between previous embarrassment and a cautious hope. Cinematic focus on the gentle rise and fall of her shoulders, the careful positioning of her hands, and the nuanced expressions conveying her inner emotional landscape, while Alexander's composed, watchful stance provided a stabilizing influence. The reflective chandeliers and sunlight weaving a textured, immersive environment that amplified both tension and intimacy, establishing a foundation for the unfolding dark romance. Every detail, the reflective floors, shimmering light on hair and fabric, the muted ambient sounds, and the poised micro-movements, converged to create a cinematic tableau, capturing the first nuanced stage of trust, anticipation, and emotional connection, as Olivia and Alexander navigated the grand wedding hall together, setting the stage for the suspenseful and emotionally resonant events to follow, their subtle, synchronized gestures and attentive glances embodying the rich interplay of vulnerability, authority, and emerging romantic tension. The atmosphere in the grand wedding hall shifted as Olivia Bennet adjusted the delicate folds of her dress, her dark skin glowing softly in the warm sunlight streaming through tall windows, polished marble floors reflecting golden patterns that danced across the room, her eyes scanning the crowd as whispers and sideways glances rippled through the guests, creating a tension that weighed heavily on her composed posture. Every small movement, the slight flex of her fingers, the gentle lift of her chin, the careful alignment of her shoulders, captured with cinematic precision, revealing the subtle interplay of vulnerability and growing inner strength. Alexander Drake remained nearby, his tailored black suit immaculate, pale skin catching the glint of sunlight, each step measured and deliberate as he moved with controlled authority. His eyes tracking Olivia with unwavering attentiveness, micro-expressions on his face hinting at protective concern and quiet understanding, the ambient sounds of the hall, the soft clinking of glasses, muted conversations, and faint strains of the string quartet, providing a realistic backdrop that enhanced the focus on their evolving dynamic. As the ex-fiancé lingered in the background, unaware of the shift in attention, Olivia felt a surge of tentative confidence, the camera capturing the subtle sparkle in her eyes and the slight lift of her shoulders as she acknowledged Alexander's presence, the polished floors reflecting their movements and casting dynamic shadows that added depth to the visual storytelling, each reflection emphasizing textures of fabric, skin, and hair in cinematic detail. Alexander took a deliberate step closer. His posture upright yet relaxed, a gentle smile forming at the corner of his lips, his gaze meeting Olivia's with an intensity that communicated both reassurance and authority. The micro-movements of his hands and the subtle tilt of his head creating a silent dialogue that spoke volumes without words. Cinematic lighting highlighting the contours of his face and the crisp lines of his suit while drawing attention to the soft expressions of Olivia as she processed the evolving situation. The interaction unfolded slowly, the subtle rhythm of their steps and glances creating a palpable anticipation, every micro-expression, the fleeting widening of eyes, the slight curve of lips, the careful shift of weight, captured to enhance both emotional depth and realism, the surrounding guests now forming a muted audience. Their reactions secondary to the magnetic tension between the two protagonists. Olivia's breath steadied, a quiet sense of hope and cautious curiosity emerging as Alexander's presence offered a stabilizing influence. The cinematic frame emphasizing the balance between vulnerability and authority, the interplay of light, reflections, and subtle gestures creating a rich tableau that conveyed both narrative progression and the initial spark of a deepening emotional connection, setting the stage for the public intervention and the subsequent dark romance payoff to unfold with maximum cinematic impact. Olivia Bennet felt the room shift as Alexander Drake subtly closed the distance between them, the sunlight reflecting off polished marble floors and gilded chandeliers, casting intricate patterns across her dark skin and the elegant folds of her dress, each movement captured with cinematic precision. Her fingers lightly adjusted the fabric at her waist as she took a careful step forward, the ex-fiancé's earlier mockery lingering in her mind, creating a tension that made the air thick with anticipation, while the background hum of muted conversations, soft clinking of glasses, and distant piano notes provided an ambient soundtrack that heightened the realism and depth of the moment. Alexander's sharp features caught the light, his tailored black suit immaculate, his pale skin glowing in the golden rays, every step deliberate, exuding controlled authority yet tempered with a subtle warmth in his eyes that acknowledged Olivia's presence and her emotional state, his posture composed, shoulders squared, projecting both protection and attentiveness, the micro-expressions on his face shifting almost imperceptibly to communicate reassurance without words. Olivia's gaze flicked between the ex-fiancé and Alexander, her chest rising slightly as she breathed in the charged atmosphere, the slight curve of her lips and the subtle narrowing of her eyes revealing a mixture of curiosity, cautious hope, and underlying resilience, the reflective surfaces of the hall amplifying every gesture and nuance, the shadows and light highlighting the textures of her hair, the soft sway of her dress, and the delicate alignment of her hands, creating a visual rhythm that mirrored her internal emotional beat. As Alexander reached a respectful distance, his eyes met hers with a steady intensity, the tilt of his head, the slight flex of his fingers, and the micro-adjustment of his stance conveying silent communication and attentive observation, the cinematic frame emphasizing the interplay between their positions, the ambient lighting casting both soft highlights and subtle shadows to enhance the depth and realism of their interaction. The surrounding crowd now appearing secondary yet still providing a sense of social context that accentuated the stakes and emotional tension. Olivia's heartbeat in sync with the slow cadence of their subtle gestures, each careful step and nuanced glance creating a tapestry of unspoken dialogue. The polished marble reflecting the interplay of light on skin and fabric, the soft rustle of her dress and the slight shift in Alexander's posture captured to amplify suspense and intimate connection, the cinematic focus reinforcing the emerging bond, quiet anticipation, and the careful navigation of public scrutiny, establishing a rich, emotionally immersive dark romance moment within the sunlit wedding hall, setting the stage for the dramatic public intervention and subsequent emotional payoff. The tension in the grand wedding hall heightened as Olivia Bennet felt the subtle shift in the room, her dark skin glowing under the soft sunlight streaming through the tall windows, casting fragmented reflections on the polished marble floors. The gentle rustle of her elegant dress punctuating the quiet murmurs of the audience around her, each sound emphasizing the weight of the moment. Alexander Drake approached with deliberate composure, his tailored black suit perfectly fitting his pale skin, every step measured, radiating both authority and subtle warmth, his gaze locked onto Olivia's, micro-expressions conveying reassurance and attentive observation, the cinematic framing capturing the nuances of his posture, the tilt of his head, the flex of his fingers, and the slight curve of his lips, all contributing to the unspoken dialogue between them. Olivia's eyes flickered across the crowd, noting the whispers and sideways glances, the mix of curiosity, envy, and awe among the guests, yet her focus remained on Alexander, the golden light enhancing the textures of her hair, skin, and dress, emphasizing both vulnerability and inner strength, the reflective surfaces of the hall adding depth to the visual tableau, capturing every micro-movement with cinematic clarity. The soft strains of the string quartet and the muted clinking of glasses provided a rich auditory backdrop, grounding the scene in realism while highlighting the evolving emotional connection. Each subtle gesture, the gentle lift of her chin, the careful positioning of her hands, the alignment of her shoulders, signifying both anticipation and growing confidence. A delicate balance between vulnerability and the emerging sense of trust. Alexander's presence exuded quiet authority, his measured proximity and careful steps creating a protective yet non-intrusive space around Olivia. The interplay of light and shadows on his suit and face highlighting the cinematic intensity, while the surrounding crowd's reactions remained secondary, the focus tightly held on the intricate dynamics between the two protagonists, capturing the nuanced buildup of suspense and emotional engagement. Olivia's heart rate slowed as she absorbed the subtle support conveyed through Alexander's attentive gestures and steady gaze, cinematic lighting highlighting the reflective textures of the chandeliers, floors, and fabrics, the ambient details enriching the realism and tension, every flicker of her eyes, the gentle sway of her dress, and the poised micro-expressions reinforcing the layered dark romance narrative. As the moment stretched, the anticipation of a forthcoming public interaction lingered, the hall seemingly suspended in cinematic focus, each movement, glance, and micro-expression contributing to the immersive storytelling, capturing the rising emotional stakes, subtle romantic tension, and the measured approach of authority and reassurance, setting the stage for the eventual public intervention that would restore Olivia's dignity and deepen the bond between her and Alexander within the opulent, sunlit wedding hall. The tension in the wedding hall reached a quiet crescendo as Olivia Bennet felt the subtle shift in focus, the warm sunlight bouncing off polished marble floors and gilded chandeliers, illuminating her dark skin and the delicate folds of her elegant dress, every detail of her posture and micro-expression captured with cinematic precision. Alexander Drake's presence near her radiated calm authority, his tailored black suit crisp against his pale skin, each step measured, deliberate, and filled with a sense of restrained power, his eyes tracking Olivia with unwavering attention, communicating reassurance, protective intent, and quiet understanding without a word, the subtle curve of his lips and the slight tilt of his head conveying layered emotion. Olivia's gaze swept over the crowd, noting the hushed murmurs, subtle sideways glances, and flashes of astonishment as guests began to sense the shift in energy, the ambient sounds of clinking glasses and distant piano notes providing a realistic backdrop that highlighted the focus on the two protagonists, while reflective surfaces enhanced the depth and richness of the visual storytelling, capturing textures of fabric, skin, hair, and light. As Alexander moved slightly closer, maintaining an unintrusive distance, Olivia's heart quickened with a mixture of apprehension and cautious anticipation, the camera capturing her subtle inhalation, the gentle flex of her fingers, and the poised lift of her chin, cinematic lighting emphasizing the interplay of vulnerability and emerging confidence, every micro-expression revealing her internal emotional landscape, from lingering nervousness to the first flickers of hope and trust. Alexander's careful, deliberate movements and steady gaze created a protective cocoon around her presence, the subtle alignment of his posture, slight adjustment of weight, and minimal gestures crafting a silent dialogue that conveyed support, authority, and empathetic awareness, the cinematic framing highlighting the contrast between the composed serenity of his stance and the tender apprehension in Olivia's expressions. The polished marble reflected the shifting light across the hall, creating dynamic patterns that emphasized movement, depth, and texture, each subtle sway of Olivia's dress, each careful micro-shift in her hands, and every flicker of recognition in her eyes building a tableau rich in suspense and emotional resonance. The ambient soundscape adding immersive depth without overwhelming the focus on the protagonists. As the moment stretched, the hall seemed to hold its collective breath, the soft strains of the string quartet blending with the hushed murmur of guests, cinematic focus emphasizing the growing anticipation, the subtle romantic tension, and the emotional stakes. Each detail, the reflective surfaces, light patterns, gestures, and micro-expressions, converging to create a fully immersive dark romance scene, setting the stage for the imminent public intervention that would transform tension into resolution, dignity, and a nuanced, cinematic emotional payoff. The moment shifted with dramatic clarity as Olivia Bennet felt the energy in the grand wedding hall tighten around her, her dark skin illuminated by the soft golden sunlight streaming through the ornate windows, reflecting off the polished marble floors and creating a kaleidoscope of light that danced across the delicate folds of her elegant dress, each movement captured in cinematic detail, the subtle swaying of her dress and the slight adjustment of her posture conveying her inner tension and growing anticipation. Alexander Drake moved deliberately closer, his tailored black suit pristine, pale skin highlighted by the ambient light, his eyes fixed unwaveringly on Olivia, micro-expressions revealing quiet resolve, protective awareness, and subtle warmth. Every nuanced gesture, the tilt of his head, the flex of his fingers, the measured shift in stance, communicated a silent reassurance that penetrated the room's tense atmosphere. The soft murmur of guests and the delicate clinking of glasses creating an ambient soundtrack that accentuated the focus on their interaction without distraction. Olivia's gaze darted across the audience, noting hushed whispers, sideways glances, and flashes of astonishment, yet her focus remained anchored on Alexander, the cinematic framing emphasizing the contrast between her vulnerable poise and the composed authority of his presence, the reflective surfaces of the hall casting dynamic light and shadow across skin, hair, and fabric, amplifying the dramatic tension and visual depth of the scene. The string quartet's gentle notes wove through the ambient soundscape, punctuating each subtle movement and glance, while the polished floors mirrored the interplay of light and motion, capturing the delicate sway of Olivia's dress and the confident precision of Alexander's steps, every detail reinforcing the narrative of anticipation, trust, and the subtle undercurrent of emerging romantic tension. As Alexander drew to a respectful proximity, his gaze locked with Olivia's, cinematic focus capturing the silent dialogue of eyes, micro-expressions, and infinitesimal shifts in posture, the room's collective attention forming a soft backdrop that heightened the significance of this intimate yet public interaction, each nuanced expression and subtle movement contributing to the immersive dark romance atmosphere. Olivia's breath steadied, her chest rising and falling with careful rhythm, subtle flickers of hope and trust in her eyes. The interplay of reflective light across her hair and skin emphasizing textures, depth, and cinematic realism, every micro-expression, delicate hand adjustment, and poised stance layering emotional complexity and visual richness. The anticipation built palpably as the hall seemed to hold its breath, the soft harmonic swell of music and ambient sound reinforcing the gravity and elegance of the moment, the cinematic framing highlighting the growing bond, nuanced emotional connection, and the meticulous orchestration of light, shadow, and human microgesture, establishing the stage for the imminent public intervention that would culminate in restored dignity, subtle romantic resonance, and a compelling narrative payoff within the sunlit opulence of the wedding hall. The grand wedding hall seemed suspended in a moment of cinematic stillness as Olivia Bennet stood with poised elegance, her dark skin bathed in the warm sunlight streaming through the tall, ornate windows, reflecting off the polished marble floors and golden chandeliers, casting intricate patterns that danced across her elegant dress. Every subtle sway, micro-movement, and careful positioning of her hands captured in rich detail, conveying the depth of her anticipation, vulnerability, and emerging confidence. Alexander Drake stepped forward with measured authority, his tailored black suit pristine, pale skin illuminated by the soft sunlight, each movement deliberate and composed, exuding controlled power tempered with subtle warmth. His eyes locked on Olivia, micro-expressions conveying reassurance, quiet understanding, and a protective presence, the gentle tilt of his head, flex of his fingers, and poised stance creating a silent, intricate dialogue that captivated the attention of the surrounding crowd. Olivia's gaze swept over the assembly, noting the softened murmurs, astonished glances, and the quiet shift in energy as the guests sensed the significance of the moment, the cinematic framing emphasizing the contrast between her vulnerability and Alexander's composed authority. Reflective surfaces enhancing textures of hair, fabric, and skin, adding depth and richness to the visual storytelling, every nuance amplifying the emotional resonance and suspense. The soft strains of the string quartet and the gentle clinking of glasses underscored the tension and elegance, while the reflective marble captured the interplay of movement and light, highlighting the subtle sway of Olivia's dress and the precise, deliberate steps of Alexander, every detail layering the anticipation, trust, and burgeoning emotional connection. The cinematic focus capturing the delicate balance of vulnerability and protective presence, subtle romantic undertones weaving into the evolving narrative. Alexander extended his hand toward Olivia with calm authority, the gesture measured and confident, the surrounding light illuminating his sharp features and the refined lines of his suit, while Olivia's eyes met his with a flicker of recognition, trust, and gratitude, the cinematic perspective capturing the silent exchange of reassurance and emerging emotional bond, every micro-expression and nuanced movement emphasizing their deepening connection and the public nature of the moment. The hall collectively held its breath as Alexander placed the ring on Olivia's finger with precision, the polished surface catching the sunlight, casting delicate reflections across her dark skin and the folds of her dress. The audience's collective gasp and softened murmurs framing the cinematic climax, Olivia's chest rising and falling with measured breaths, eyes shimmering with emotion, micro-movements capturing a mix of awe, validation, and quiet elation. The reflective light enhancing the visual impact and depth of the scene, every detail, the interplay of shadows and sunlight, reflective textures, micro-expressions, subtle gestures, and poised body language, converged to create a cinematic tableau of dark romance, justice, and emotional resolution. The hall bathed in warm light as the moment crystallized Olivia's restored dignity and the profound, nuanced connection with Alexander, the subtle romantic tension fully realized. The public setting amplifying the triumph of personal integrity and emotional fulfillment, concluding the narrative with an immersive, visually rich, and emotionally resonant climax within the opulent wedding hall.